Hello, we are very happy that you can join us today. We are here at the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, where we are launching a new research initiative, the Center for Information Integrity and the Internet. My name is Edson C. Tandok Jr. I'm an associate professor here at the Wee Kim Wee School and also the director of InCube. We are very excited to share the results of our first national survey with you. The survey looks at public information behavior during the COVID-19 pandemic and also looks at our general outlook as we head into the new normal, 1 year after the COVID-19 pandemic began. But before that, a few messages from Professor Joseph Liu, the Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, and Professor May Nguyen, the Chair of the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information.
We live in an age where information is ubiquitous. Data is very much becoming an invaluable asset for our society. But how do we interpret this information? How do we disseminate it in a responsible way? These are the pressing questions that we will have to tackle looking ahead into our future. Here at NTU, at the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information, we have set up what we believe to be a research center that will be at the forefront of knowledge in these domains. The Center for Information Integrity and the Internet, otherwise known as InCube, is going to play a crucial role, we believe, in terms of illuminating what some of the challenges are as we move forward into the digital revolution that is before us. So I hope you will look forward to the exciting research that is going to be undertaken in InCube and the output that the center is going to produce. We hope it will be useful for you in your own work and that there will be plenty of opportunities to collaborate with you through InCube. Do stay in touch with us and give us feedback, which we very much welcome, into the work that we produce and how we might be even better in terms of our effort to shine light on these important questions. Thank you very much.
In the beginning of 2020, as the world was first experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic, it was also experiencing another type of phenomena. This was the phenomena of the infodemic. And for the first time, the World Health Organization recognized this as an issue across the world, especially in the spread of COVID-19 information. And since then, the massive amounts of information, its authenticity, and how it's affecting large populations has become a very important area to study. The Wee Kim Wee School is very pleased to announce the launch of Center for Information Integrity and the Internet, or the InCube. This is a center that's going to bring together scholars, academics, and researchers from many different fields to look at the evolution, the spread, the complexity, as well as the very important integrity and the effects of information on cyberspace. I look forward to many breakthrough research coming out from the center, and congratulations to the team.
Thank you, Professor Liu and Professor Nguyen. Indeed, we are living in an uncertain period, and a way for us to manage this uncertainty is by keeping ourselves informed. And so it's important for us to look at the information sources that we turn to. Getting information used to be very straightforward, but we are now living in a period of information overload. In just a click, we have easy access to a seemingly unlimited supply of information, but not all of them is correct. That's why here at InCube, we are committed to continue doing research that helps to promote information integrity. And we seek to track and also understand the ways we get information, the quality of information that we get, and also how all of these affect us in a number of ways, from our well-being, shaping our public opinion, to even influencing the way we behave. And that's also precisely what we hope to do with the results of our first national survey, which we'll be sharing with you today. So joining me in the panel is a group of experts here at NTU. First is Dr. Edmund Lee. He is an assistant professor here at the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information, and also an assistant director of InCube. He specializes in big data and public health communications. Dr. Chang Hao Go is a research fellow here at InCube, and his research focuses on privacy and trust. Dr. Kelly Yiping is an assistant professor at the School of Computer Science and Engineering. She is also our member at InCube. Dr. Caleb Che is an assistant professor of marketing and international business at the Nanyang Business School. He's also a member of InCube. Finally, Dr. Benjamin Lee is an assistant professor here at the Wee Kim Wee School and also a collaborator for InCube. He specializes in human-computer interaction and virtual reality. A few details first about our survey. Our own online survey was conducted between December 16 and December 31, and it involved about 1,600 Singapore residents. The first batch of findings that we will be sharing with you today will focus on three general themes. The first one will focus on media consumption. This will be followed by looking at public outlook, and we will end with some details and results about consumer behavior. If you have any questions or comments about the results we'll be sharing today, please let us know via the chat that you will see in the screen that we're sharing with you today. So let's now first talk about media consumption during COVID-19. I'll be sharing the results, and later on we will go to the panel to help us make sense of these findings. So one of the main questions that we hope to track here at InCube is just how do we spend and how much time do we spend across different media platforms. In our first survey, we asked questions about how often we use different types of social media apps and also different types of information sources. What we find here is that on average, we see that our respondents spend about 7 hours per day on the internet. They also spend about 4 hours on social media apps, also about 4 hours on messaging apps. What we see here, and this is not a new story, what we see here is that online platforms dominate our media use. And we can see that some of the traditional platforms, such as reading a print newspaper or a print book, and watching television or listening to the radio, these actually trail behind. But the question is, how did COVID-19 affect or change the way we get information and the way we use different media platforms? I mean, you remember we went through almost 2 months of the circuit breaker, and a lot of that we spend using different media sources. So what we see here is from WhatsApp to dating apps, a majority of our respondents noted an increase in how frequently they used a wide variety of platforms. So what you're seeing on the screen now, you see that WhatsApp, this is we asked our respondents how they think that compared to the pre-COVID-19 period, how their use of each of these platforms changed, right? So we see, for example, WhatsApp, 74.5% said that their use of WhatsApp increased compared to pre-COVID-19. We also see the same story when we talk about the use of communication devices. Here we see that video conferencing tools actually surged. 82.5% said that their use of video conferencing tools increased because of the pandemic. And that's also true with a number of other devices that we use to communicate. One explanation that we are looking at and that we're very interested in here at InCube is how the social distancing measures that were implemented to slow down the spread of COVID-19 may have increased feelings of isolation. We humans, we are social beings, right? But with this pandemic, social gatherings have been limited, right? We stopped shaking hands or hugging each other. And so in our survey, we also asked our respondents how often they felt isolated, how often they felt left out, and how often they felt that they lacked companionship. Across all these measures, nearly 1 in 2 respondents say they have experienced these at least sometimes to very often during the past few months. An interesting finding from our survey is a positive relationship between how many days in a week we work from home and how often we feel isolated. So let us now go to Dr. Yi Ping from the School of Computer Science and Engineering. She is an experienced researcher when it comes to big data analyses, and she will definitely let us know what she thinks about some of these findings that we just shared to you. Kelly?
Thank you, Essen. Based on our survey results, we find an increase in the use of social media apps and digital devices during the pandemic. In fact, the mobile phones penetration rate in Singapore is ranked top worldwide. It refers to the number of mobile subscriptions over the total population in Singapore. Its value now reaches 150%, meaning that every Singaporean has about 1.5 mobile subscriptions on average. And this actually provides a ground for various online activities. The increased use in these apps and digital devices can be partly explained by the work from home strategy adopted by most companies during the pandemic. We can see from the uptrend use of video conferencing tools, tablets, and other computer devices. Social media apps are widely used to get ourselves connected and informed. Among all social media apps, the increase in the use of WhatsApp is the highest. And this may be explained by the government's use of this platform to communicate COVID-19 updates, make key announcements, clarify fake news, etc. As a direct result of these online activities, our cyber world is experiencing an information overload, and we actually call it infodemic. A huge amount of information, mostly related to COVID-19 in the past few months, is posted and also propagated daily. But not all of it is reliable. In addition, the contents of this information are moving more and more heterogeneous. They could contain text, images, videos, and be propagated over different social media platforms. Misinformation can be very harmful to both our physical and mental health. So some recent research has been focusing on developing effective technology to detect fake news, to understand how they propagate over the social network, and try to stop their propagation at an early stage. Back to you, Essen.
Thanks, Kelly. So one of the biggest gainers last year, during the pandemic, was the video conferencing app Zoom. Previously unheard of before the pandemic, now a household name. Words like unmute or I can't hear you, they've become part of our regular day-to-day conversations. So in our survey, we found that Zoom is the most used video conferencing app, used often or very often by almost 40% of our respondents. This is followed by Microsoft Teams and Skype and Google Meet. Much of this is fueled by those working from home, especially those working in finance and education sectors. Video conferencing for school and work is something many of us have probably done before the pandemic, but because of COVID-19, it has become a regular thing. This is why There are also concerns about how video conferencing may be affecting us. An area that we're interested in here at InCube is video conferencing fatigue. In our survey, we also asked our respondents how often they feel, these different states, after their video conferencing calls. We found that almost half of our respondents report feeling tired from making video conferencing calls. Many also agreed feeling drained and feeling overwhelmed. The majority are also concerned about their privacy, during video conferencing. You might remember, some cases of Zoom bombing or hackers, getting into some Zoom sessions that we had actually here in Singapore. So to make sense of these findings about video conferencing and privacy issues when it comes to video conferencing, we have Dr. Benjamin Lee. He will share about the phenomenon of video conference fatigue, and Dr. Chang Hao Goh, he will share about what he thinks when it comes to privacy concerns about video conferencing. Let's first go to Benji.
Thank you, Edson. What we are seeing here is an increase in the use of video conferencing tools, with Zoom being the most popular option. Some factors for Zoom being the top choice include ease of use and accessibility as compared to some of the other software. What is interesting from these findings is the prevalence of video conference fatigue, where there have been anecdotal reports of people feeling exhausted, tired, burnout, and feeling anxious as a result of prolonged use of video conferencing. So from the findings, it seems that Singaporeans are also not spared from it, with almost half of all of our respondents reporting some form of tiredness or feeling exhausted and drained from video conferencing. So the next question is, what are then the specific factors that can lead to video conference fatigue? Is it the length of our Zoom meetings? Could it be that when we are looking at the screen with many faces looking back at us, that it makes us feel overwhelmed and uncomfortable, that there might be some people on the screen who are looking at us? Or maybe some of us are more aware of our own cameras and we feel stressed out from constantly checking how we are looking in front of our bosses and colleagues. Many of these scenarios were not present pre-COVID, when face-to-face meetings were the norm. So if we can identify the causes of video conference fatigue, maybe we can target them to reduce the effects on us. Maybe switch off our cameras or switch off videos entirely and just using voice calls for our meetings, if that helps. Lastly, we are hearing reports of 8 in 10 Singaporeans keen to have some form of work from home arrangements even after the pandemic is over. Some of us may have gotten used to staying at home, traveling less to work, or having that extra time to take care of our children. But with these signs of video conference fatigue and exhaustion, is that necessarily a good thing? How will video conference fatigue and its associated symptoms affect productivity? Are employers concerned about the well-being of their employees who are spending longer hours on these video conferencing tools? For the sake of our employees' well-being then, is face-to-face meetings ultimately a better option? These are some concerns which need to be looked into, and here at NTU and InCube, we are actively studying them. So, thank you.
Okay, let's now go to Dr. Chang Hao.
Yes, thank you. I would say that the increase in the usage of video conferencing apps and privacy risk actually goes hand in hand. So, more people surrendering their personal information via video conferencing, and we get more chances of privacy violations. So the survey results actually show that more than half of the respondents expressed concerns over their privacy as they use these video conferencing platforms. So I would say that there is a number of risks that actually drive all these privacy concerns. The first type of risk is actually related to the providers of video conferencing apps. So it is about how they actually handle our personal data. So I would say that there are a lot of consideration revolving around this issue. For example, how much do we understand about the privacy policies that we rarely read? And then also to what extent the providers actually access or let third party access our personal data. And then also, do we have complete trust in the video conferencing app providers to ensure that our personal data are actually protected or secure? I think most importantly is what are the costs that actually that we may actually incurred when our privacy is actually violated by them. Yeah, and also how do we actually cope with this privacy violation? So there's another type of privacy risk which actually comes from users just like us. So whenever we have meetings with unfamiliar people, we will try to minimize background information or regulate our self-disclosure patterns to actually prevent revealing too much information about ourselves. So there are also other types of malicious users with ill intentions to actually access or steal our personal information. For example, we know Zoom bombing. We get unwelcome visitors actually intruding our private meetings. And then we also have deepfake technologies, which you can actually superimpose someone's face into yours and then trying to impersonate someone to trick them into surrendering their personal information. So lastly, I would say that apart from all these privacy risks that we may actually encounter via video conferencing, there are also benefits that we can get from them. So I believe that ultimately it is how the users actually balance between these risks and benefits when they actually use this video conferencing app, and also to know what is actually at stake when they actually use these apps. Yeah.
Thank you, Chang Hao and Benji. Again, for your comments or questions or suggestions for us, please let us know via the chat. Now we move into the second theme of our results, where we will focus on our residents' outlook as we head into the new normal. So it's been a year since the first case of COVID-19 was recorded in Singapore. And in a few days, we will be celebrating Chinese New Year. So what do our respondents think the new year will bring? So in our survey, we also asked people's outlook looking forward into the new normal. We find that the majority has a positive outlook, with 63.1% saying they think the COVID-19 situation will improve in the next 12 months. 23.6% said they think the situation will remain the same, while 13.3% said they think the situation will get worse. We also look at activities that our respondents look forward to resuming when the pandemic is over. And here we see that some 51.9% said they're likely or very likely to start giving handshakes. Some 49.2% said they hope to resume attending public religious services after the pandemic is over. But of course, no surprise, right? The majority, 60.6%, said that they look forward to resuming traveling out of Singapore when the pandemic is over. A smaller percentage, however, only 33.6%, said they are likely or very likely to attend large public gatherings such as concerts after COVID-19. And so what we think that we're seeing here is that we see optimism in this case comes with some caution, as many of our respondents also reported that they are likely to continue with the precautionary measures that we have developed over the course of the pandemic. So in our survey, we also asked our respondents how likely they think they would continue on some of these precautionary measures that we've been doing during this outbreak. We see that 68.7% said they are likely or very likely to continue avoiding places with large public gatherings, while 68.5% said they would continue to engage in social distancing even after the pandemic is over. It also looks like face masks are here to stay. 64.3% said they would continue to wear face masks outdoors even after COVID-19, while 61.8% said they are likely or very likely to continue to work from home whenever possible. Some 55% said they will continue to shop groceries online. Here to discuss these findings is Dr. Edmund Lee. Edmund?
Thank you very much, Edson, for walking us through the statistics. There are many things to unpack in this section on the residents' outlook in the new normal, but there are a few key insights I would like to draw your attention to. First, from the results, it is evident that a large proportion of Singaporeans believe that the COVID situation will improve in the next 12 months, and I think there are multiple factors that contribute to this level of optimism. Well, for one, our community transmission rates has been low for the past few months. Second, the government's timeliness in procuring and securing our vaccine supply. And just a few days ago, the multi-ministry task force actually announced that they have plans to go door to door to talk to residents to encourage residents to take up vaccines when given a chance, and as well as to address some of the concerns that they may have. And I think all this lends strength to this optimism. And in living with this pandemic, I think having this sense of optimism is crucially important because, in fact, we've done an analysis of our findings, and we found that optimism is associated with psychological, social, and emotional well-being of Singaporeans. So having that is important when we cope with this pandemic. But what really stands out for us is that this pandemic, this optimism is tempered with reality. And after all, we are a small nation. We are not insulated from the world. We could see that the incidence rates, the death rates remain pretty high in many parts of the world. And we are mindful that if we are not careful, we could always return back to this lockdown situation that we want to avoid. But what is really promising that from our results is that people are very keen to continue on with the habits that we have picked up during the circuit breaker, such as avoiding large crowds, using hand sanitizers, practicing social distancing. But I do see an upcoming challenge for all of us, and that is in a few weeks' time, we are heading into Chinese New Year. And how can we as a country celebrate responsibly and by following the new guidelines set by the government? And more importantly, how can we encourage our friends, our relatives, our family members to do that as well? And not let a moment of distraction ruin the months of hard work that we have put in to get COVID under control. And like most Singaporeans, I think, and everyone here at the panel, I believe the day would come where we would engage in a lot of the pre-COVID activities, such as traveling, and I think all of us are looking forward to that. But until then, as Minister Lawrence Wong said just yesterday, that the pandemic would be here to stay for a while, and I think we have to know that our day-to-day efforts in social distancing would pay off in the long run if we continue to maintain our vigilance. So back to you, Edson.
Thanks, Edmund. So we've been sharing a lot of our findings. There are a lot to take, but hopefully you're still with us. And we'll now be heading into the final theme of our results sharing, which is focusing on our economic outlook and consumer behavior. And again, if you have questions, please let us know via the chat. We'll be reading them at the end of the session. We'll make sure we have time to address any questions or comments that you may have for us in the panel. So now let's focus on online consumption behavior in the new normal and also our economic outlook. We all know of people and friends or family members who've lost their jobs during the pandemic. Some of our favorite stores and shops also closed down. So there is really an impact on people's livelihood that can be attributed to this pandemic. In our survey, we also asked our respondents how concerned they are on a number of things, and here we focus on their concern about their long and short-term financial situation. We see here that 59.8% in total are very concerned or extremely concerned about their long-term financial future, while 56.3% are very concerned or are extremely concerned about their career prospects. 52.7% are very or extremely concerned about their day-to-day finances. The majority of our respondents also reported an increase in their household expenses over the course of the pandemic. Here we see that 48.8% saying their household expenses increased somehow, and 13.5% saying it increased by a lot. So that accounts for 62.3% of our respondents saying that their household expenses have increased. We contrast that with 35.1% saying that their household income decreased since COVID-19 started. However, we see some 18.2% of our respondents reporting that their household income actually increased during the pandemic. So that's about expenses and income. Now we move to online shopping, right, which many of us actually do. We found that online shopping actually surged during the pandemic with more people staying indoors, many of us staying home. 66% of our respondents said that their online shopping actually increased during the pandemic. Some of you may have purchased something during 11/11 only to realize there's actually 12/12 coming after. So we see online shopping increasing. We find that the most commonly purchased items are cooked food and grocery items, and also drinks. Here we show you our comparison of how often our respondents use each of these different online shopping apps. We also found that cashless payments are on the rise, also perhaps accelerated by the pandemic. Credit card was the most dominant method of paying, used by 61.5% of our respondents, while only 9.3% said that they use mobile wallets such as Payla, PayNow, or GrabPay to pay for their online purchases. Only 3.3% said they use cash on delivery. One interesting thing that we found, 1 out of 4 respondents plan to make big value purchases after the pandemic has started. These refers to buying property, buying cars, or buying your luxury items, all these branded bags and watches. So we see that our respondents also look forward to resuming making these big value purchases after the pandemic is over. Here to make sense of all these findings is Dr. Caleb Che from the Nanyang Business School.
Thank you, Edson. There are 3 general consumer insights from this survey that I'd like to discuss. The first is regarding Singaporeans' financial worries. Not surprisingly, the pandemic has created a lot of uncertainty for many Singaporeans, as we do see a significant portion of respondents who are anxious about their financial situation going forward. In addition, it seems that on average, more Singaporean households have either earned the same or less rather than more since COVID-19 has hit. But at the same time, they might actually be spending more. So this actually underscores the financial pressures that the pandemic has placed on Singapore's economy and the population at large. Secondly, the survey results show that there's a significant growth of online shopping during this pandemic period, with over 2/3 of Singaporeans reporting increased online shopping. These shoppers are typically spending between $1 and $150 per visit, are within the 20 to 40 age range, and so it's likely that many people are now shifting their online purchasing of essentials to online platforms. This also highlights the strategy that many of these online shopping platforms and apps have used in order to compete for Singaporean consumers, such as using special promotions, bundles, and discounts. So we can see that this has been quite effective in gathering Singaporean consumers to buy more online. The last insight, that there could be some optimism in terms of the signs of a recovery for consumer spending for higher priced goods and also big ticket items, as we know how much the pandemic has hit the retail sector. A quarter of the respondents reported that they plan on buying either property or luxury items or even cars once the pandemic is over. So this kind of shows that there is somewhat of a pent-up demand in consumer spending for these sectors, although we do have to take this results and these responses with a bit of a grain of salt. Back to you, Edison.
Thanks, Caleb. We now have some time for your questions and comments. If you have any for us, please type them down in the chat. For our friends in the media who are joining us in this live stream, we also have a separate Zoom session with you later, so please stay tuned. Right after the live stream, we will join you in a Zoom session to answer any questions you might have. But for those of you watching right now, if you have any questions or comments, please let us know. We're now looking at the chat and we'll be reading them shortly. I will now start by reading one question from Matt. Thanks, Prof, for the sharing, especially on the privacy and data. What are some of the implications of increased use of social media apps, especially during COVID-19? So let me answer that briefly and I will go to the panel. I think, like what Kelly said earlier, right, an increased use of social media applications also means an potentially an increased exposure to unreliable information that are swirling on these spaces. And so there's an increased risk for misinformation. And that is quite important, especially at a time where we are now, where the information that we get, whether reliable or not, may influence how we behave, how we respond to the precautionary measures. Public health is particularly important, and it is quite vulnerable to misinformation that we're seeing now. So for me, that's the first important implication of an increased use of social media during this period. I'll now turn to Kelly, and she'll share more about this. But there are also issues on privacy and video conferencing, so we'll also hear from the others in a while. Kelly, you want to say something?
Okay. So regarding the increase in the use of social media apps, I think one main purpose is actually to obtain useful information from the online resource. And typically, it of course contains COVID-19 updates. And sometimes it would also contain some other information like some promotions in online shopping sites or some updates of friends or some other things. Another main reason for the increase in the use of social media apps would be the social feelings, the need from the social feelings. Because during the pandemic, most of us are separated, especially during the circuit break. So we are not allowed to go out unless necessary. So we feel kind of isolated and also kind of lonely from our friends, from our colleagues, and from relatives, etc. So it's very natural for human beings to have some chats, some casual ones from time to time through our social media apps with our friends, our relatives, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Maybe we now go to Benji because we've talked about video conferencing fatigue, right? But fatigue also comes from other tools that we use, and so if we increase our use of any communication platform, and in this case, what we saw in the data is increased use of social media, that might also be doing something to us, right? When it comes to just feeling drained.
Yes, definitely. I think one key aspect that is linking these devices and their effects is the idea of screen time. So whether you are using video conferencing apps or social media apps on your devices, it's always increasing the amount of time that you are looking on your screens, whether it's on your devices or whether it's on the computer screens. And there's been a whole strand of research into the effects of a prolonged use of screens and how that affects us. And so I think one key outcome of using too much of these social media apps is the idea of fatigue. And another concept that is linked is the idea of social media fatigue, where because we are spending all this time scrolling through our feeds, looking at how people are doing, it causes us to feel anxious about our own lives in comparison to them. And because when everyone's on lockdown, you're hardly given the chance to travel out so that you can find more places to go, post more pictures in your feed. Now people are just stuck at home thinking of how they are going to compare with other people, and this adds on to the amount of stress and anxiety that they feel. And so I think that's a key thing that's been happening here when we are stuck at home with being asked to be online for our meetings, And with our handphones being the main source of entertainment, these are naturally the effects that we're going to face because of that.
Yeah, thanks, Benji. One research that we're doing here at InCube is also the impact of our media use on different measures of our well-being. So there have been a lot of studies that looked at, say, the impact of using social media on social comparison when we start comparing ourselves with others. For example, how is it possible that some people are able to travel when stuck at home, right? And also there is research linking social media use on, say, feelings of loneliness or starting to exhibit symptoms of depression. So that has been established in the literature. And if we increase our use of these social media platforms, these potential effects on our well-being might also be more pronounced. Edmund, I think, also has something to add to this. Edmund?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times we focus on the negative impact of social media on these digital platforms, but I think we forget that there are positive elements to it. So during the lockdown, during the circuit breaker, I think a lot of us rely on Zoom, in fact, not just for work professional meetings, but also for family gatherings. And in fact, I see many Singaporeans actually organizing a dinner over Zoom, where you can actually keep a sense of this community and this sense of belong with your family members without risking your lives when the pandemic was surging. So there are positive elements to it. And in fact, during the pandemic, a lot of education shifted online, and I think this gives students a chance to learn how to find information on their own. So it promotes a more active learning online. So there are positive elements to this. Some silver lining out of this pandemic in terms of how we interact with social media platforms, how we interact with digital media platforms, and its impact on our level of optimism.
Thanks, Edwin, for sharing that. Indeed, another thing that we're tracking here at InCube is what we call the good internet. You know, that the internet is also used for positive outcomes. For example, during this pandemic, we saw a lot of activities related to donations, right, mobilizing charity work, especially in other countries, right? But also we saw some of that here in Singapore. And so, something that we're also interested in is how are we using the internet and other digital platforms for something that is good. Okay, now we have another question from Dylan Ang. Why do you think most respondents are feeling optimistic? I think that's a very optimistic point. Okay, so thanks, Dylan. Let me first take a shot in answering this question, and I'll also then ask the members of the panel to talk about this. I think part of this might be the timing of our survey. We went into the field on starting on December 16. That's 2 days after the Prime Minister's speech, if you remember, when he announced that Singapore will be getting a vaccine supply. That's also a few days before we entered into phase 3 with some of the restrictions being eased. And so we think that the timing of the questionnaire might have also influenced this optimism. But what we want to note is, a public outlook can be volatile and might be dependent on the actual situation. And so there's something that we hope to keep track at InCube. Our situation changes very rapidly, right? In last week, we've heard of new clusters that were detected in the country, and this definitely might affect the public psyche. And so we hope to keep track of these things here in the center. Anyone else who wants to try to make sense of why people are feeling more optimistic, at least based on the results of our survey that was done late last year? Edmund?
Thank you, Edson. I think there are multiple factors that contribute that keeps this level of optimism elevated. So I think the most critical reason, one of them would be we could see that the community transmission rates remain low. And contrast that with what we see in many parts of Europe and even in the US, where they are still trying to keep COVID under control, and they're still debating whether masks are relevant or not. So I think people in Singapore could see this, the results of our past efforts in social distancing. And I think that really contributes to this level of optimism here. And obviously, as Edson has already mentioned, the arrival of vaccine could potentially be a game changer. But I think one of the things that we really want to be cautious about is that how can we keep our spirits up while we are dealing with an invisible enemy, right? Because the next round of COVID could strike at any time, and we need to stay ahead of the game and not to be laggards in that.
Thanks, Edmund. We now go to the next question from Andrew Duffy, who is intrigued by the pent-up demand for big-ticket goods. Does this show a real desire for the goods or a desire to spend as a way of expressing a sense of freedom? Do you think that's, I think, is a really interesting point. We turn to Caleb.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So as I was saying earlier, we do have to take these results with a grain of salt because these are survey responses, and there could be a discrepancy between what people say in a survey that they're willing to spend in the future for something versus what actually happens, whether they are willing to purchase it in the end. So there is a little bit of discrepancy there. But what I do think it shows is that people have a desire for things to go back to normal, right? When the uncertainty with financial situations starts to get better, and when the economy starts to regain its confidence and so forth, then people will like to go back to purchasing these bigger things, like whether it's using their savings to buy a property or to maybe buy a car that they were waiting upon doing so. And so I think this is a little bit of a tempered kind of optimism, but it does show some good signs.
Thanks, Caleb. Maybe part of this also maybe aspirational, right? That when a way for us to really look forward into hopefully a better immediate future is starting to plan what are the nice things that we're going to buy for ourselves. Thanks, Caleb. We have another question, and I'm sure this will be directed to Caleb, from Ting Ting. She says, I see a surge of consumption desire for luxury good, while in general the household income decreases. What could be the underlying reasons?
Okay. Again, I think we can't read too much into the survey results saying that there must be a surge in luxury demand. I think, again, this reflects more of a desire for people to want to return back to a normal life of living a certain lifestyle. And whether it actually reflects household income or the fact that people have their ability to purchase again, that might not be the case. But I think it shows, like you said, it shows desire. It shows people want to go back to this new reality and return back to normal. So.
All right. Thanks, Caleb. We have another question from Lanchard. Thanks for sharing the increase of apps used during COVID-19. Do you think this is a temporary change due to the special situation, or it is long-lasting? Do we have a plan to repeat the survey? Let me tackle the last part of the question. Yes, the goal for us here at N-Cube is to track information behavior over time, and so across a number of measures, and one of these measures would be looking at whether our use of social media platforms are increasing or decreasing over time, and what may be explaining such change in the patterns. When it comes to the first part of the question, whether we think it's a temporary change or something that's more permanent, it's something that we're also curious about. There's no definite answer yet. what we saw in another survey study that we did at the earlier stage of the pandemic around February, between February and April last year, is that the use of mainstream news sources such as online news sites and television for news actually ranked higher than the use of social media for news. When before COVID, when we did our annual surveys of news consumption in Singapore, we saw that social media sources, Facebook specifically and WhatsApp, were the most commonly used sources for news. But during the pandemic, the websites of our mainstream news organizations in Singapore and also television became the primary sources of information for a large number of our residents here in Singapore. Whether it's again, whether it is long-lasting, it is something that we probably hope we will see, based on the data that we will be getting from the center as we continue doing these regular surveys of our residents. We now go to the next question from Yanhua. Did you notice any age groups being more affected by COVID in terms of social media use, well-being, and expenditure? I will put Dr. Chang Hao Go on the spot. He's been doing the data analyses for our survey results, and he's done some analyses looking at whether there are certain age groups or certain sectors, right, that may be more affected in terms of some of the measures that we're looking at. Chang Hao?
Thank you, Edson. I think in terms of age groups, I would say we did some preliminary analysis, and then we found that younger age group tends to use social media apps more, and then whereas they do not differ in terms of their well-being, and so I think we can look at we can actually look at more analysis, and then to see whether if age group actually really changes the way that people actually behave in the pandemic. Yeah.
Thanks, Chang Hao. And if I remember it right, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You would know this better than I do. But I think what we found is the in terms of the use, right? Young people tend to use social media apps more often than older age groups. But when we did the correlations, right, about the increase, right, it seems like the age was not correlated, right? It seems that across all age groups, the use of digital devices and media platforms increased, right, across age groups.
Yes, they all increased in terms of age groups.
Right. So age wasn't a significant predictor there, for at least for the increase, right? The actual use, we saw that. Of course, we know that young people use these platforms more often, but I think across all ages, everyone increased their use of these platforms during the pandemic. One thing that we're also curious about is, as what Yanhua asked, is on the impact on expenses and income, and whether these vary depending on sectors, right? So that's something that we're looking at. One thing that I remember from the data is how the use of video conferencing was most pronounced among those who are working for finance and education sectors, which we think definitely makes sense. We are from the education sector, and we use Zoom on a regular basis for our classes, but also those in the finance sector. And I think we've also found that those who work from home naturally also reported a higher frequency of using video conferencing tools. All right, that's I think all the questions we currently have. And again, for our friends in the media, we will have a Zoom session later to answer any questions you might have for the panel. And so that is all the time that we have today. Thank you very much for joining us as we launch our new center here at NTU, the Center for Information Integrity and the Internet, or what we call InCube. We hope that you find our results, the results that we shared with you today, interesting and also helpful. We hope to conduct regular research on timely, relevant, and important issues that affect all of us here in Singapore, especially those that are related to information integrity. You know, what this pandemic has taught us, among many other things, is the importance of timely and accurate information and how fake news, misinformation, and disinformation can hurt public health. And we at Ncube, we are committed to help promote information integrity through high quality and relevant research. And I hope that you will join us in this initiative. We hope to see you in our next webinar. And if you have any comments and suggestions for us, or if you want to partner and collaborate with us, please send us an email at ncube@ntu.edu.sg. Also, you can follow the WikiMWI School of Communication and Information Facebook account. Please follow the WikiMWI School on Facebook to keep track of our future activities. On behalf of all of us here at Ncube, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day and stay healthy.